The rain did not fall in Seoul that night. It hovered, suspended in humid stillness, as if the sky itself refused to commit to anything at all. Sarah stood in the marble foyer of the Kang estate with a single suitcase by her feet and her hand resting, instinctively, protectively, over the curve of her stomach. 7 months. 7 months of silence dressed up as marriage. Behind her, the house breathed its usual cold breath, recycled air, sterile and temperature-controlled, untouched by anything as human as warmth. Ahead of her, the gate stood open. Someone had left it open. She would later learn it was the last order Kang Joon-ho ever gave inside that house before he walked out of it for good. He had not said goodbye. He had not looked back. He had simply told his driver, in the flat, clipped voice he used for enemies and employees alike, take her home, and walked toward a black car where a woman Sarah did not recognize sat waiting in the passenger seat, her perfume already bleeding into the leather. Sarah did not cry. She had promised herself, months ago, in a nursery painted the color of sage leaves, that she would not cry in front of people who did not deserve her tears. She picked up the suitcase herself. No one moved to help her. This is where our story begins tonight. Not with a wedding. Not with a proposal. But with a woman standing in the wreckage of a marriage she built with her own 2 hands, watching the man who was supposed to protect her walk toward someone else, while their unborn child turned quietly inside her, as if even the baby understood that something irreversible had just happened. If you were her, in that exact moment, suitcase in hand, husband walking away, would you have said something? Or would you have let the silence speak for you? Keep that question in your chest. We will return to it. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been nothing more than an accountant with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, hired to quietly audit a shipping company that, on paper, moved furniture and textiles across the Pacific. She had not asked questions about the numbers that did not add up, not because she was naive, but because she understood, the way people from nothing always understand, that some doors are not meant to be opened by people who cannot afford the consequences of what waits behind them. Kang Joon-ho had noticed her before she had ever noticed him. He noticed the way she double-checked figures other executives waved through without a glance. He noticed that she did not flinch when armed men walked past her desk as though they were simply part of the furniture. He noticed, most of all, that she never once tried to charm him. In his world, everyone wanted something. Sarah had wanted nothing. That, more than her intelligence, more than her composure, was what undid him. Their courtship had not been loud. It had been built in the margins, a coat placed over her shoulders during a late night at the office, a car sent to take her home before she had to ask, a silence between them that felt, for the first time in his adult life, like peace instead of threat. He married her 11 months after their first real conversation. Not because tradition demanded it. Because for the first time since he had taken over his father's empire at 26, he had found one person who made the weight of that empire feel lighter instead of heavier. She used to believe that was enough. If you have ever loved someone who carried more power than warmth, tell me, did you mistake the silence in the room for peace too? The unraveling did not happen in a single night. It happened in the small, cumulative erosion of 100 smaller nights, a returned phone call that never came, a dinner reservation he forgot to cancel, a woman's voice on the other end of a call he took in another room with the door pulled almost, but not entirely, shut. Sarah was not a woman who confronted ghosts. She was a woman who built paper trails. By the time she was 5 months pregnant, she had already begun quietly transferring her expertise, the same sharp eyes that had once audited his companies for signs of theft, toward auditing her own marriage. Bank statements. Property deeds. Shell companies registered under names that meant nothing to anyone except the people who had signed them. She found the second woman's name first. Then she found something far more dangerous. She found her own name, buried in documents Joon-ho had never bothered to explain to her, listed as 61% owner of 3 of his companies, a wedding gift, transferred quietly under his lawyer's advice for tax purposes, and then, apparently, forgotten by a husband too consumed by his double life to remember what he had signed away. He had given her an empire without meaning to. He simply never imagined she would ever need to use it. Now, before we go further into how far this betrayal runs, and how Sarah chooses to answer it not with tears, not with revenge for its own sake, but with the quiet, devastating patience of a woman who has already done the math. Tell me where you are watching this from tonight. Type your city or country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story is traveling, and I want you sitting with us as it unfolds. The night Joon-ho left her at the gate was not the beginning of Sarah's undoing. It was the beginning of his. He did not know, as his car pulled away from the estate with another woman's perfume filling the air between them, that his wife was not walking into homelessness. She was walking into a townhouse she had quietly purchased 8 months earlier, under a name that had nothing to do with the Kang family, using funds that were, on paper, legally and irrevocably hers. He did not know that the documents sitting in a fireproof safe in that townhouse could dismantle the very foundation of the empire he thought he had built alone. He did not know, because he had never once, in 3 years of marriage, thought to ask her what she understood. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. The townhouse Sarah walked into that night was quiet in a way the Kang estate had never been. Not the hollow, manufactured quiet of expensive soundproofing and staff trained to disappear when spoken to, but a real quiet. Chosen. Hers. She set the suitcase down by the door and stood there for a long moment, one hand still resting over her stomach, feeling the baby shift as though settling into the stillness alongside her. There was no security detail here. No cameras disguised as light fixtures. No driver waiting outside in case Mr. Kang required something at 3 in the morning. There was only a narrow hallway, a kitchen she had chosen the countertops for herself, and upstairs, a nursery painted the color of sage leaves, with a mobile hanging above the crib strung with small cloth stars she had sewn by hand during the nights Joon-ho did not come home. She had made those stars during the worst of it. Somehow, that felt fitting now. She did not unpack the suitcase that night. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, still in the dress she had worn to what was supposed to be a dinner with his mother, and allowed herself exactly 11 minutes to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had learned, long before she ever met Kang Joon-ho, that grief given a boundary does not consume you. Grief given no boundary will. At the 11-minute mark, she stood, washed her face, and opened her laptop. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself with tears. It announces itself with clarity. And clarity, for a woman like Sarah, was far more dangerous than rage. Have you ever noticed that the people who hurt you the most are rarely afraid of your anger, but they are terrified of your silence? Sit with that for a moment. We will come back to it. Kang Joon-ho did not think of his wife again until 4 days later. This, in itself, told you everything you needed to know about the kind of man he had let himself become. He was sitting in the penthouse he kept for exactly these situations, the ones he did not want following him home, back when home was a place he still returned to, with Yojin curled against his side, her fingers tracing idle patterns against his chest, when his lawyer called with a tone in his voice Joon-ho had heard perhaps twice before in his life. Both times, someone had died. Mr. Kang, the lawyer said carefully, I need you to come to the office. Now. It's about the shipping division. And the textile holdings. And, his voice caught, the logistics company under your father's name. Joon-ho sat up. What about them? There was a pause on the line long enough to feel like its own kind of answer. They're not entirely yours anymore, sir. They haven't been for months. If someone you trusted completely turned out to know more about your own life than you did, would you call that a betrayal, or would you call it the truth finally catching up to you? I want you to really think about that one. Because Sarah certainly did. Joon-ho arrived at the office at 6 in the morning, still in yesterday's shirt, his tie discarded somewhere in the back of the car. He had not slept. He had barely spoken. The conference room was already full when he walked in, his father's old lawyer, his own legal counsel, 2 board members who would not meet his eyes, and a stack of documents thick enough to have its own gravitational pull. Sarah was not there. She had not needed to be. Her attorney explained it in the flat, procedural language of someone reading a grocery list, though every word landed like a verdict. 61% ownership of Kang Logistics, transferred 11 months ago under a tax restructuring agreement signed and notarized by Mr. Kang himself. Full voting rights. Full authority over asset liquidation, executive appointment, and the lawyer paused here, almost apologetically, termination of existing leadership contracts, including his own employment agreement as CEO. You gave this to her, the the family lawyer said quietly, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. You signed it yourself, Joon-ho. She never took anything from you. You handed it to her. She simply never gave it back. Joon-ho stared at his own signature at the bottom of a document he barely remembered signing, dated the same week Sarah had told him, quietly, in the dark, that she was 11 weeks pregnant, and he had been too distracted by a shipment crisis in Busan to fully register what either piece of news meant. He had been building an empire with one hand and destroying his family with the other, and he had not even noticed the moment his wife quietly became the only person capable of stopping him. We are 5 minutes into tonight's story now, and before we go further into what Sarah does with the power she never asked for, I want you to do something for me. Type the name of your city or your country in the comments, right now, wherever you are watching from. I read every single one, and I want to know exactly how far tonight's story is reaching. Then stay with me, because what happens next is the part you came here for. The board meeting that followed Joon-ho's discovery was not loud. There was no shouting. No overturned chairs. That was, perhaps, the most unsettling part of it for him, the realization that his wife had never needed volume to be dangerous. She did not attend in person. She sent a single-page letter, read aloud by her attorney to the full board, informing them that as majority stakeholder, she would be retaining current management structures for a period of 90 days, pending a full internal review of financial conduct, asset allocation, and the line that made Joon-ho's stomach turn to ice, personal expenditures inconsistent with company funds. She had found the penthouse. Of course she had found the penthouse. She had found the jewelry. The private accounts. The 11 months of quiet, careless betrayal that he had assumed, arrogantly, would remain invisible simply because he was the one who signed the checks. He had been wrong. She had always been the one who understood the checks. That evening, for the first time since the night he walked out of the estate, Joon-ho drove to the townhouse. He stood outside the gate, a small, unremarkable gate, nothing like the iron and stone monument that guarded the estate, and stared up at a single lit window on the second floor. The nursery. He did not know, could not have known, that behind that window, Sarah stood with one hand pressed flat against the cool glass, watching his car idle at the curb for 11 full minutes before it finally, silently, pulled away. Neither of them moved first. Neither of them was ready to. Some distances are not measured in kilometers. They are measured in everything that was never said when it should have been, stacked one silence on top of another, until the space between two people becomes its own kind of country, one with no roads leading back in. 90 days is a strange unit of time when you spend it waiting to see whether a person you once loved is capable of becoming someone new. Sarah did not spend those 90 days plotting his destruction. That was the assumption Joon-ho's mother made, the first time she called, her voice clipped with the particular fury of a woman who had built her own life around never needing anyone, and could not understand a daughter-in-law who had quietly outmaneuvered her son without raising her voice once. You have humiliated him, his mother said, in lieu of a greeting. Sarah, 6 months pregnant now and folding tiny cotton onesies into a drawer she had painted the same sage green as the walls, did not stop what she was doing. I didn't humiliate him, she said, evenly. I simply stopped protecting him from the truth of what he'd already done. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, quieter, almost human, did he ever tell you he loved you? Truly. Not the version he performs for the cameras and the board. Sarah closed the drawer. Does it matter now? It should have mattered before, his mother said, and hung up. That conversation stayed with Sarah longer than she wanted it to. Not because she doubted herself, she had long since stopped needing anyone's permission to trust her own judgment, but because it was the first time anyone in the Kang family had admitted, even obliquely, that Joon-ho's coldness had not started with her. It had simply found her, the way rivers find the lowest ground, following a path that had been carved out long before she ever arrived. If someone hurts you the same way they were once hurt, does understanding where the wound came from change what it costs you? I don't have an easy answer for that one. I don't think Sarah did either. Joon-ho spent those 90 days learning, for the first time in his adult life, what it felt like to ask permission. He needed Sarah's signature to authorize the Busan shipment restructuring. He needed her approval to release quarterly bonuses to the logistics staff who had worked for his family for over a decade. He needed, humiliatingly, a scheduled 30-minute call with her attorney simply to access records that had once been entirely his to command without explanation. He used to run this empire like a war. Now he ran it like a man standing in a doorway, waiting to be let in. Yojin left him in the 6th week. Quietly, without confrontation, the way people leave when they realize the version of you they wanted was never going to survive contact with real consequences. She had wanted the penthouse, the title, the danger dressed up as glamour. She had not wanted the man underneath all of it, the one now spending his nights alone in an empty apartment, staring at a phone that Sarah never called first. He deserved that particular loneliness. He knew it, even as it hollowed him out night after night. There is a specific kind of silence that only exists after you have lost the version of yourself you were pretending to be. Joon-ho sat inside that silence for weeks, and found, underneath the wreckage of his own making, something he had not expected. Not self-pity. Accountability. He began attending the 90-day review meetings in person. He answered every question the internal auditors asked without deflection, without the practiced charm he had once used to talk his way around difficult truths. He signed over full operational transparency on the accounts Sarah's team flagged, including the ones that would have once made him furious to have questioned at all. He did not do this to win her back. He understood, with a clarity that arrived far too late to be comfortable, that he had forfeited any right to expect that outcome. He did it because for the first time in his life, he wanted to be a man his child could look at without inheriting his father's silence as an example of what love was supposed to look like. Have you ever changed for someone, only to realize the change was really for yourself all along? Hold on to that thought. It matters for what comes next. Sarah gave birth in early spring, in a private hospital room with soft grey walls and a window that looked out over a courtyard just beginning to bloom. Joon-ho was not in the room. He had not asked to be. He understood, finally, that presence was not something you were owed simply because your name was on a marriage certificate. He waited in the hallway instead, for 11 hours, without once sitting down. When the nurse finally allowed him a few minutes to see them, Sarah pale and exhausted against white pillows, a small, dark-haired girl sleeping against her chest, he did not reach for the baby. He did not reach for Sarah either. He simply stood in the doorway, the same way he had once stood outside the gate of the townhouse, waiting to see if he would be let any closer. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. It was the only thing he trusted himself to say without his voice breaking. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Not with warmth. Not with the old softness he had spent 3 years taking for granted and then, in a single season, destroyed completely. But not with hatred either. Somewhere quieter than both. "She has your eyes," Sarah said finally. "I hope she never learns to use them the way you did." It was not forgiveness. Joon-ho understood that immediately. It was something closer to a verdict, and an open door, standing side by side in the same sentence, proof that both could exist at once, that a woman could refuse to erase what had happened to her while still allowing the smallest possibility of a future neither of them had earned yet. He named their daughter Hannah, at Sarah's request. It means one. The beginning of something, rather than the end. They did not remarry that year. They did not move back into the estate together, and Sarah did not relinquish a single share of the 61% that had once belonged, unknowingly, entirely to her. But twice a week, Joon-ho came to the townhouse, not the estate, never the estate again, and sat on the nursery floor with his daughter, learning slowly, painfully, unglamorously, what it meant to show up for someone without expecting anything owed to him in return. Some empires are built on silence and structured around fear. Sarah's was not. Hers was built, brick by careful brick, on the simple, radical decision to never again mistake someone else's coldness for her own safety. She kept the townhouse. She kept the sage green nursery. She kept the 61%. And slowly, carefully, on terms that were entirely her own, she decided what, if anything, she would ever let him keep of her in return. If you've made it this far into tonight's story, I want to ask you one final question before we close. Do you believe people can truly change, or do you believe some silences simply run too deep to ever be undone? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them, and tonight, I think I want to hear your answer more than I want to give you mine.